It's extra drama for book number 52, White Lies. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Sweet Valley Diaries. And I'm here again with Dr. Daniel Okobi. Hi, Daniel.
Hey.
Great question.
Too much to get into. We barely scratched the surface.
We're talking for so long.
Valley Beach community.
Chances are that the episode that I actually released last week was not 90 minutes long, but we have been talking about this book for a good hour and 35 minutes or so, but we have more to say. And you brought up a great question in the main recap episode last week, which was, is John Pfeifer a good guy? And that question was aimed at me, but I am curious what you think the answer to that question.
Well, you know, I kind of want to hear the prosecution's case before we advance.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I can definitely appease that desire. I think that John makes some poor choices in this book. And I worry that at his interest in the beginning, like, where is his heart? Like, does he actually think that he needs to protect Jennifer from Rick? Like, is that his motivation? Or is it just like, I want Jennifer to be mine. I don't want this other guy to have her. Because that is a very sort of like toxic and dangerous reason to start intervening in someone's life. But I do get the sense from John that even if nothing ever happened romantically between him and Jennifer, that he still really wants to protect her from making this bad choice with Rick. Elizabeth, as I pointed out in a passage I read in last week's episode, does observe to him, like, it doesn't really seem like she wants to be rescued by you or anybody, John. So consider that. So I think maybe his heart's in the right place, but it's a little hard to parse.
The lady has agency. Sure. So maybe we should just talk about John qua John. Yeah. I think that the confused aspect is something to definitely consider. I guess John, I assume, is also maybe a junior.
Yeah.
So another person who's older than Jennifer and has a certain kind of conception on the romantic interest he has in Jennifer, which is not even portrayed particularly two-dimensionally. It's just like, she's pretty, therefore he likes her. But that could just be an artifact of starting with this book. And John knows what he's kind of interested in, and he knows, more importantly, and that could end up going to the problematic direction, as you were hinting. So he's trying to just like protect her and be her friend. And, you know, maybe something will come of that in the end. And maybe something that will come of that in the end is doing a lot of work, because I think that's really what he wants. But prime directive is to block, or, you know, cock block Rick and keep him down.
Well, and as you said in the last episode, the book ends up being the unlikely tale of how he is able to vanquish his rival without, you know, I mean, it helps that the rival is in jail. Like, so he puts the rival in jail and then is able to swoop in, you know, it's the dream, right? He's living this male fantasy.
Proto incel.
So literally in a cell. I think that
the unlikely tale of how a great guy wins in the end. It does help that he's good looking too.
Yeah. He ceases to be an incel by putting his rival in a cell. That's the story of White Lies.
It's not great.
It's not. But
yeah,
I think that the thing that we're talking about with John's, like, the cloudiness of John's intentions and desires, it is something that I think in reality would have been difficult for someone in John's position to even know for sure himself, to even have full clarity himself about how much he's being driven by, like, what he really hopes will happen, you know? Like, I think it's possible to have a fantasy about what could happen with someone romantically and be able to say, I know this isn't really reality. This is just a dream. And I'm putting it aside. But to not like fully put it aside, even though you tell yourself you're going to.
Sure. But one thing from chapter 7, right? This is Jennifer stared at his back a moment, slightly surprised. In 5 days, John hadn't asked a single question about Rick's arrest, hadn't said anything about her botched plans to go to New York. Nothing. He was just the same old, friendly, dependable John. Side note, in the friend zone.
Yeah.
And it gets into a little bit later saying, suddenly Jennifer felt a flicker of gratitude towards John because John was like helping her get around to class. And it says he was always so easy to get along with, so non-judgmental. And I'm like thinking to myself, no, this dude's very judgmental.
Yeah, she just doesn't know.
She doesn't know. And the way is in chapter 1, it mentions that he made an impatient gesture with one hand, drunk driving, brawling, vandalism. She knows it all thanks to her father. He's a lawyer, at Wells and Wells. That's like things that Elizabeth is saying in response to John being impatient because he had said, doesn't she know that he has a really bad reputation? And I'm thinking there's some judgment on behalf of both John and Elizabeth. And, in that way, they're kind of like allies in protecting the, not yet tarnished by bad boys out there.
Not yet tarnished, yeah. Well, I think, and Elizabeth, as the book alludes, Elizabeth has a little bit of skin in the game because she has experienced having her reputation somewhat tarnished by proximity to Rick. But even that still is in support of what you're saying because it is all about reputation. Like, because Rick is known as a bad boy and it's like bad to be associated with him, the neighborhood, the town of Sweet Valley has already judged Rick and therefore judges all who are associated with Rick.
Yeah. And the other thing that I had highlighted from that passage, it's just a drunk driving, 80s or not, there was definitely a movement in the 80s with the Mothers Against Drunk Driving to increase or, raise the age that you would have to be to legally drive to avoid the scourge of drunk driving in teenagers, which is the main reason why you have to be 21 in a lot of states to drink, even though that's not actively enforced a lot of times.
Right. And a lot of
there's this suburban mom judgmentalism that's profusing that. And that's what I thought about. And I was like, I don't know. Some judgment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny that now that you're mentioning it, I'm realizing that while this book doesn't invoke it at all, Elizabeth also was in an accident once that was caused by a drunk driver, and she was in a coma. So.
Oh, wow. Is that why she drives a Fiat now?
No, she drove the Fiat before, but she was a passenger on her old boyfriend Todd's motorcycle, and she was forbidden to ride a motorcycle because her cousin Rexy had been in a motorcycle crash. But she did it anyway after resisting for an entire book, and then she was
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Wild child.
Yeah, especially after she woke up from that coma. She had a real personality shift for the rest of that book. But I would have loved your opinion on any of the books where a character is in a coma and the doctors tell somebody that the person will only come out of the coma if they can find the will to live. They have to want it. They have to want to come out of the coma.
Oh, yeah? Not if they're kissed by the right guy?
Well, sometimes that's all it takes to want it,
Very much as Snow White is in a coma.
Yeah, I was going to say, were Snow White and Sleeping Beauty both in comas? I guess they
Sleeping
were.
Beauty, you're right. Sleeping Beauty.
No, Snow White too.
Snow White too?
Yeah.
Oh, man. There's too much sleeping going on. Although, weirdly enough, the raciest this gets is talking about kissing and coming back at 2 a.m. and her parents being like, that's pretty late. I mean, if you're just going to be this tired, just don't stay out very late.
Yeah.
I'm like, weird. I thought normally they would have curfews and rules about being with boys, but maybe Mr. Mitchell has higher priorities. It's not super invested in restraining his daughter from the fullness of human experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the Mitchell parents are pretty reasonable, even though it seems like they're falling into a classic parent trope of like, I forbid you to see that boy. Like Mrs. Mitchell says exactly that. But it's like, they're at their wits' end. Like, I don't know. I understand where they're coming from. If a different version of this story would be told from Rick's perspective, and he would be the kind of good guy with the humanity that is just unseen by the rest of the town. But that's not Sweet Valley High. That's a different series. Where
good question. Are there like stricter parents in this series?
Yeah, there are. Not the Wakefields, but there are stricter parents. Yeah. And sometimes that's really the thing that drives the book is parents being unreasonable or just like not trying hard enough to understand the kids. But then there's books like this where the parents are reasonable and the kids are the ones that are irrational. Just returning briefly to the topic of John, you mentioned that John was judgmental and that Jennifer saw him as non-judgmental, the kind of irony of that. But one of the notes that I wrote down when I was reading this book toward the end, I had this moment of clarity. And it was during the time that Jennifer was complaining about her dad a lot and talking about how great Rick was a lot and just being really kind of defensive and angry and spilling all that to John. And I thought to myself, how could John still like this girl? I guess I was just really put off by the way that Jennifer was so angry about what happened with this guy, Rick, and the story that she made up, that she wouldn't go see her father before surgery. Like, it really didn't speak well of her character in my mind. And I was like,
well, John... sometimes when you're really infatuated with someone, you're willing to overlook the clear evidence suggesting the contrary. Almost like Jennifer overlooked Rick's actual being found with this stolen stuff. John is just overlooking the fact that he is like interacting with this girl daily.
I see what you're saying. And I think that maybe you're even saying that what the next book in the series should be about is somebody who really cares about John is trying to intervene in his relationship with this crazy girl, Jennifer Mitchell, because he's really going down the wrong path. So they're going to follow Jennifer Mitchell and they're going to watch her behave badly and they're going to call the cops and report it. And then John, wouldn't that be great if the whole series was just that every book it's like the next person?
I just feel like since they have so much in common, or at least more in common than Elizabeth and her actual boyfriend, I feel like they're just trying to inch forward Elizabeth John as a thing.
You want to get Elizabeth and John together. All right. Interesting. I like it.
Definitely a ship.
For me.
But since I guess Jennifer has been redeemed to some degree in the error of her ways.
I don't really see Jennifer coming back to play a big role in the Sweet Valley High universe, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. I love the idea of shipping
she's warming
John
up to him.
and Elizabeth.
She's like looking at him with love.
Indeed. He was the one person who cared about her.
It's like a hard turn in chapter 13 where they're like, well, let's talk about this tennis person.
Yes. Well, so speaking of what's actually going to happen in the next book, it was sprinkled throughout. There's some girl named Kristen Thompson. She's a sports girl. She's into tennis. And they started talking about it, really.
They talked about it and they said, wait a minute. There's this tennis story that we should report. / a story that's not about Rick going to jail that we also have not reported that we should report. And I'm like, wait, they don't have a tennis team, and yet like all the powerful people in this town play tennis. Like that's very strange. And then it comes out, no, actually there's like a dude who's on a tennis team, but maybe they didn't have a female tennis team, or maybe just Kristen Thompson's been like working at it so hard.
She's like a phenom.
Her participation merits coverage, but it was very confusing.
Well, and especially since then she comes up again in the Jessica AJ plotline, which is basically just Jessica and AJ will it last, which is also laying some groundwork for a future book that we'll talk about this season. But so Jessica and AJ are playing a game of tennis. Jessica's really good at tennis. Jessica interacts with Kristen and says that they can hit some balls around sometime. And Kristen is like, oh yeah, maybe sometime. I cannot believe that I managed to leave this detail out of the main episode, but as long as I'm talking briefly about Jessica and AJ, there is something so amazing that Jessica says in this book. Let me find it. It's Jessica's philosophy on men. Okay. Jessica's talking to Elizabeth. And Jessica's all proud of how she's handling things with AJ. She's convinced him to go to a party at Dana's house instead of going to dinner with his uncle like he planned. Both twins' boyfriends have dinners with uncles in this book, which is interesting. Listen, you want to hear my philosophy about men? Elizabeth gave her a skeptical look. Not really, but you'll tell me anyway. That's right. Pushing herself up off the bed, Jessica sauntered over to the mirror and critically examined her face. My theory about men is you have to make them do what you want, she explained. She carefully picked off a clump of mascara and flicked it away. Otherwise, they'll never think of it themselves. So, that's our Jessica.
That doesn't sound like a very original theory about men.
No. Well, so Jessica basically, this is, I guess I did allude to it in the first episode that Jessica thinks she can just kind of make AJ do whatever she wants by convincing him that it's what he wants to. And she's pretty successful with it, but it's starting to cause some trouble. But anyway, they play tennis. They see Kristen. Kristen Thompson, she just keeps on popping up. And then at the very end of the book, all of the teens, it's like, it's a Friday, and everybody's all excited. Like, Winston Egbert is on top of his Volkswagen, like, cheering everybody, like, it's the weekend. What are we going to do this weekend? Sweet Valley High? It was really...
Well, basically, they've definitely anticipated the popularity of Rebecca Black.
Right, it's Friday.
A holiday mood in the air. It's actually just Friday. And everyone's going to go to the beach together.
That's totally what's happening here. Like, this would be a perfect music video if this were reality for the Rebecca Black song Friday. And Elizabeth tries to convince Kristen to come along. And Bruce Patman is there too. He's like, Kristen, these tennis courts aren't for use on Friday afternoons, which is just something he makes up to try and convince her to come along.
It does mention when they introduce her that, you know, she has this coach and she practices like every day, and that's why she's like this new tennis star. So she's really committed to this, which is uncool. Like, even Elizabeth, who's kind of supposed to be a nerd, is not as committed to anything in particular. Like, this is a person who's actually focused on something, which is interesting.
Yeah, this is the only place we ever see Kristen Thompson in this book. This is a new character, and we only see her on the tennis court. So that's what the next book is going to be about. And Daniel, I would love it, and I'm sure our listeners would love it, if you would tease book 53.
Is Elizabeth right? Is it true that there's nothing that will tear Kristen away from the tennis court? Find out in Sweet Valley High number 53, Second Chance.
So you heard it here first. Second Chance. Gladiators. All about another rando, Kristen Thompson, and her tennis journeys.
Not to be confused with Tristan Thompson, a basketball player.
He probably had his own journey. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed yourself reading this book. And I don't think we really came down firm on the question of whether John Pfeifer is a good guy or not. But I think it's not a yes or no question.
I don't know. I mean, he's not a terribly bad guy, but he thinks he's a great guy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe he's not as good a guy as he thinks he is. Let's just go with
Yep.
that.
I hope that's good enough for you two, Gladiators. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, you can follow Sweet Valley Diaries on Instagram at Sweet Valley Diaries or on Twitter at Sweet Valley. And don't forget, you can find all these episodes, not only on all of your podcatchers of choice, but also sweetvalleydiaries.net, the website that started it all. All right. Thanks a lot, Daniel. And thank you to listeners. Bye.
All right.
Okay, I had to end it because I have to use the restroom. Sorry if that's TMI, but we had a nice long conversation. This was so much fun.